Thank you for sticking with News Central. One slot continues. This time, we're talking drugs. For decades, Africa has been disproportionately burdened with malaria. Of the estimated 241 million malaria cases and 627,000 deaths reported globally in 2020, the WHO African region accounted for 95% of all cases and 96% of deaths, with children under the age of 5 accounting for about 80% of all deaths in the region. After the distribution disruptions and vaccine protectionism during the COVID-19 pandemic, which exposed vulnerabilities, Africa is finding a renewed urgency to step up its local production capacity. So the news that a Kenyan pharmaceutical company, Universal Corporation Limited, has become the first manufacturer in Africa to receive WHO approval to produce a life-saving malaria drug is being celebrated. The antimalaria drug, which I'll just call SP, is frequently used to prevent seasonal malaria in children during months of peak transmission periods, such as rainy season. Previously, demand for these drugs in Africa has been met through the importation of generic versions of the medicine from India and China. According to the managing director at the Universal Corporation Limited, that's UCL, the WHO pre-qualification is a significant step towards reducing the over-reliance on imported drugs and strengthening Africa's self-sufficiency in providing essential healthcare solutions. Why does this pre-qualification from WHO matter? What are the issues associated with this feat for Africa's advancement in drug manufacturing and, by extension, healthcare in Africa? To help us demystify this is Odinaka Kingsley, Obeta, biomedical scientist and West Africa lead, African Leaders Malaria Alliance, Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining us, Odinaka.
Yeah, thank you so much, Felicity. It's quite a pleasure to be discussing this with you. Yeah.
Right. Please just educate us, including myself, about this new anti-malaria drug.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, this medication is not necessarily a new drug. It's not a new drug in the market. However, what we are celebrating is the fact that for the very first time in history, Africa now has a company that is, locally based here in the continent, given the pre-qualification license by the WHO to locally manufacture this medication. So the anti-malaria drug we're talking about is sulfadoxine permetamine plus amlodipine, is, pronounced as an abbreviation SP. So it's frequently used for seasonal malaria prevention, just to prevent malaria, especially in the raining season. And the major aim, the major use for this drug is actually targeted at children within the months of peak transmission, and I think you've mentioned a lot of this even in the highlight. So it's quite interesting for us to see that this medication is now locally produced in Africa, and this means so much for the continent as a whole. So it's a pre-existing medication, but then we're just glad to know now that we're no longer going to be dependent entirely on China and India, to get this medication, especially when they need to be distributed across different countries in the continent.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Really, it is not a new drug. It is something that has been around for a while. Can you explain to us the celebration around the fact that it is being locally manufactured in Africa? Why is that so important?
Yeah, so this is actually very, very important for the whole continent because, during the COVID-19, there was quite a lot that was revealed. The African continent healthcare system or healthcare delivery system was shaken and kind of weighed with so much work, such that the weaknesses that we have currently existing in our healthcare delivery system was exposed to the entire world. And it became clear that the healthcare delivery system in Africa was over-reliant on a lot of, medic drugs and even other essential health commodities. And that was quite a lot of problem because the challenges we faced as a continent in terms of providing timely intervention, health intervention to individuals in need within the period was, being met with a shortage of both medication, a shortage of both personal protective equipment, a shortage of other essential medicines and even vaccines. So with this particular breakthrough, which the continent have recorded, it's quite a lot of it's quite a lot to celebrate. So prior to now, with the lack of pre-qualified manufacturers in Africa has raised quite a lot of concerns. And like I mentioned, the COVID-19 quite exposed a lot of this. And the concern have always been that if Africa does not have, pharmaceutical companies based in Africa that have been qualified or pre-qualified by the WHO to produce medication for the continent, then it means we would have to depend a lot of the times on countries like China, countries like India, to be able to access both medications, vaccines, and other essential, medications or medical supplies. So celebrating this particular breakthrough is quite essential for us as a continent because nearly all malaria cases happens in the African continent. We're looking at about 95% of the entire global malaria cases, happening here in the continent. And of course, you see the statistics reading over 600,000 deaths we record annually. And 80% of these deaths we're tying to, children under the ages of 5 that are based here in Africa. So there's quite a lot for us to lose. So we are most hit by malaria, and this is hence the need for us to begin to think towards a direction where we're able to have our own solutions, locally generated solutions. And of course, we just recently started celebrating the R21 Matrix vaccine that was produced by Oxford to support the R-ASO1 vaccine that we have from GSK. All these efforts are all aimed towards, reducing the malaria burden across the African continent, which is most hit. So having a locally manufactured malaria drug is quite critical given the malaria burden in the African continent right now. And it is just so important that we are able to have this locally produced medication to reduce the burden of malaria across the continent. This is too important. So yeah, basically that's it.
How does this perception about Africa and our product is still growing? So how does this approval impact on perception and reputation of African pharmaceutical companies in the global healthcare sector?
Yeah, this is a very important question. The WHO pre-qualification is very important because one of the key things that it does is that it puts a stamp on the quality of the drug that is being produced, and it also guarantees that this particular drug can be effective. So that means this drug or this product can be trusted, right? Now, malaria misdiagnosis and substandard treatment has contributed to global burden with an estimated 116,000 deaths in sub-Saharan Africa alone. And this is tied to a lot of falsified or poor quality antimalarials, like a lot of fake antimalaria in the market, right? Now, the pre-qualification that has been granted to UCL, the Kenyan company that is responsible for the production of the drug that we're celebrating right now, kind of stands as it gives integrity to the drug. And now, with the whole African mentality, we believe that anything produced in Africa is substandard and anything produced in Africa probably may not be durable. The WHO pre-qualification validates that this drug is can be adhered to international standards. That this drug can reduce, the risk of substandard medication in the market. It also guarantees the fact that this medication can not only be procured by African hospitals or from other pharmaceutical companies based in Africa, but then that this drug is now of international repute and then can be patronized by other countries outside of the African continent. Now, this stamp of approval that has been given by the WHO, indicates that the drug is of international quality, and then it also indicates that the drug is has attained the highest level of safety standards, which is the two key things that is, anyone purchasing the medication will be very much interested in. So the approval also boosts the confidence that the drug's efficacy, is good enough for markets, right? And this is going to increase the level of patronage, for this medication, even by other countries outside of Africa that, have malaria endemic regions around them. And of course, we should be grateful to Medicines for Malaria Venture, one of the key organizations that have been in the forefront of supporting African manufacturers, in attaining WHO pre-qualification. So this is quite a good one for the entire market.
Yes, I was actually making an effort to read through the names of the collaboration that gave rise to this approval. And I must say, there's a lot of people. It took a team to get us here. So now that we are here, we've gotten this pre-qualification, like you said, is a boost for us. How do we leverage the approval to expand production and address the high demand for malaria drugs in Africa?
Yeah, so this is really a very, very key point for us as a continent. For the past 1 year, myself and a number of young scientists, pharmacists across, 3 different countries here in Africa, Tanzania and Kenya, have been, discussing to see how we can advocate for increased investment in local production of vaccines, essential medicines, and all that. So this really is a very timely opportunity for the African continent to leverage on this approval, to expand the capacity, the production capacity of other pharmaceutical companies across the African continent. Because we're happy that one company has received a pre-qualification, but it shouldn't stop there. That shouldn't be where we're putting our feet on the pedals, right? We should be matching the brakes at this point. Rather, more efforts should be put in to ensure that we have, collaborations between countries, collaboration between even other local manufacturers in Africa, so we can help other pharmaceutical companies in the continent attain these pre-qualifications, even for other medications outside of antimalarials. So we need to stand in the gap at this point and then, unite forces with every single person who has an interest of the continent at heart to ensure that we're able to make a very tangible progress going forward.
Indeed, a lot of work needs to be done. Let's look at the broader market. While this is a step forward towards self-sufficiency, as highlighted by the COVID-19, we certainly are a long way from addressing independent production in Africa. What would you say are some of the barriers to quality local production of drugs?
Yeah, so the breakthrough we have right now, addresses quite a lot of gap in local production or local pharmaceutical production. And some of these gaps are gaps that we've identified even during the COVID-19, or especially during the COVID-19. They've been there all along, but we've never paid an attention to them. However, COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown, and the overwhelming need for health intervention within the period in 2020, exposed some of these gaps that we have. One of the gaps, of course, is the lack of skilled workers, or experts in the field of production. We are having currently the issue of the brain drain, where a lot of young Africans who are even in the pharmaceutical field and other areas of medicine are beginning to look for better opportunities outside of Nigeria. And this is quite a very huge blow even to our healthcare system currently. Recently, in a conversation with the former director of the Africa Center for Disease Control, Dr. John, we're in a meeting together, and I asked a question about what he thinks the whole brain drain thing is, the impact of the brain drain on the African continent, highlighting that while we are making effort to ensure increased production of vaccines, increased production of essential medicines and all that, we're beginning to have individuals who should be in the forefront of making this happen, step out of the continent, and how this is going to create a huge gap. So it's really a serious call for concern. We are having lack of professionals, or limited number of professionals or experts in this field. We're also having a barrier with regards to funding and investment. Of course, you know that malaria is regarded as a disease of poverty, and as a result of that, a lot of pharmaceutical companies are not even making a deliberate effort to invest in production of antimalarials, because the market is basically for individuals within the lower socioeconomic class. So it doesn't look like an area to make an investment to get so much of a profit. and not many pharmaceutical companies are venturing into these areas. It's part of the reasons why we have also advocated that local manufacturers within the African continent, where the disease burden is high, should be the ones in the forefront of the production of this medication, so that the medication can be available and accessible to individuals within the continent. So we're having issues of supply chain disruptions as well. We're also having, a lot of issues with regards to even the level of innovation that exists in the pharmaceutical industries. How many pharmaceutical companies within the African continent has the capacity to be able to meet global standard in terms of standard of production of these anti-malaria medications? So these are just but a few of some of the challenges that we have. Addressing these challenges is really going to mean a lot for the continent. It's definitely going to put the African continent on the map in terms of, making it one of the continents contributing towards, pharmaceutical products globally. It's also going to increase a lot of investment, for us in the continent. So we need to identify some of these gaps that I've mentioned, the, insufficient skilled workers or insufficient, hands or experts or professionals in the area of drug manufacturing and production, and the whole issue of lack of investment. Even local investment these days is even very limited. We've been encouraging governments, African heads of state, to look inward and see how they can begin to make deliberate investment even at country level to support some of these pharmaceutical companies.
I know there's so much to. Yeah, I know there is so much issues that needs to be talked about. I've just been told we have about 2 minutes left for this conversation. And there is this part that I would really want to speak to you quickly. If you can sum it up in about 40 seconds, where are we with drug regulation, quality issues in Africa, and how can we improve on it? I know it's a short time, but please do your best.
Yeah, so we are actually at a point where drug regulation in Africa is faced with a lot of challenges. And this, of course, it has affected quite a lot of the issue of, companies coming in to even make investments in the area of drug production and all that. We are having regulatory reforms, but then these regulatory reforms are they're not meeting up the requirements we need for a lot of these pharmaceutical companies to really increase their production capacity and all that. So with the whole influx of, false or fake anti-malaria medication and other medications in the market, there's really a need for us to heighten surveillance. There's really a need for us to heighten the issue of drug regulation. Organizations or agencies like the NAFDAC, for instance, in Nigeria, and other agencies across the African continent responsible for, monitoring drug production, drug distribution, and purchase, need to step up, their game to a very large extent. We need to start having harmonized regulatory processes across the countries in Africa. We need to start, making deliberate effort to ensure that, we don't just have regulations that are going to be in textbooks or regulations that are going to be in papers and published online, but then we're going to have regulations that are also implemented, regulations that are monitored, regulations that are ensured, that are evaluated, regulations that are adhered to by some of these pharmaceutical companies. Because while we keep celebrating this pre-qualification, for instance, for UCL in Kenya, there's still a large influx of fake anti-malarials in the market, even as we speak right now. And this, of course, is increasing the number of deaths due to fake anti-malarials in the market. So we need to really step up, our regulations, and then we need to make an effort to ensure that we have harmonized regulatory processes across the continent. Because, Kenya, for instance, have gotten the pre-qualifications, but that means Nigeria needs to be getting medications, for instance, from Kenya. We also have other countries, Malawi, Tanzania, and others will be getting these medications from Kenya. So if we don't harmonize our regulatory processes, even access to this medication that is already available right now in Kenya is going to be difficult even for countries within the African continent.
All right, your words, what I'm getting is, while we're celebrating a win, we should not rest on our oars. We should continue to regulate and improve where we are. Thank you very much for speaking with us. We appreciate your time and the insights you've provided.
Thank you so much, Felicity.
I hope you've learned a thing or two. I know I did from the two guests we had today on one slot. The program returns next week. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.